Thank you, choir. I chose that song for this morning because, like so many people of Jewish heritage, I have felt dread and fear since the Hamas massacre of more than 1,400 Israeli citizens, the women raped and tortured, the taking of the hostages. I've wanted to talk to you about this. I thought that those of you who are Jewish might need to know you are not alone in your feelings, and I wanted those of you from other backgrounds to understand more about how many Jews are feeling right now. Never again is not a slogan for Jewish people. It is a prayer that the millennial-old campaigns of hate and murder to eradicate Jews won't happen again. Now, Hanukkah is supposed to be a joyful time of family traditions. That it is a celebration of a military victory for religious freedom is not lost on me this year. That the Maccabean victory led to Jews being once again able to live securely in Israel and Jerusalem is not lost on us this year. And that thousands of diverse people died in that ancient war is not lost on us. Now, I want to be really clear, I am not here to preach today about the war. I support what Reverend Dr. Jackie Lewis has called a both-and love. I condemn Hamas. I abhor the corrupt anti-right government of Benjamin Netanyahu. Gaza needs humanitarian aid now. Israeli hostages need to be returned now. There must be a ceasefire now. Israelis and Palestinians both deserve to live in peace and both deserve to be in a homeland where they can flourish. As I have been saying to you since October 7th, as Universalists, we must understand that there is only one side: humanity. I am 97% Ashkenazi Jewish. For those of you who are not familiar with that term, my people were marginalized people in Eastern Europe. My great-great-grandparents were indentured slaves. My great-grandparents were forced or burnt out of their villages. My grandmother's 4 brothers and sisters were murdered by the Nazis. I grew up across the bay in nearby Fairfield County, where Jews were not allowed to live in certain towns, where we were not allowed to go to certain country clubs, where I was not invited to certain women's club dances. When I was in the 2nd grade, I was held down and tarred, literally tarred by stuff on paving tar, by older boys saying anti-Semitic things as they did it. My parents gave me the middle name Wynn because they thought it sounded Christian, so that if I ever had to drop Haffner because it was dangerous to be Jewish again, I would have a last name. During my interview for Princeton, the interviewer said to me, "You know, we don't take many of your kind." I asked him if he meant women. He pointedly said, "No." I learned by the 3rd grade that people hated Jews so much that they murdered us. I was having tea with my grandmother and her friend Susan when I saw the numbers on Susan's arm. I asked what they were. My grandma Anna shushed me. When I asked my parents on the way home, they said they would tell me later, and my mother got me the Diary of Anne Frank to read. I know that many of you who are Jewish have these stories too. I want to share with you one of my family's saddest stories. In 1938, my great-grandmother Pearl came to New York City to visit with her son, who she had sent illegally. She had gotten him forged papers to come to the U.S. to see him and his wife, who happened to be her niece, and their children, my father and his sister. 4 of them were living in a tenement on the east side. Have any of you been to the Tenement Museum? Yeah, so really worthwhile. So they were living in one of those tenements. The apartment only had 3 rooms. My father's family was one of 4. They lived with another family of 4, and workers came in to help with the tailoring during the day. Grandma Pearl was living a middle-class, pretty settled life in Europe at that point. My grandparents, Anna and Irving, begged her to stay. They knew by 1938 what was coming, even though they could not imagine the horrors of the camps. Great-grandma Pearl said no, her life was much better. She wasn't moving into a squalid apartment in New York. Pearl died in 1940 in a transport to a camp. So what I want to tell you is that American Ashkenazi Jews carry epigenetic terror in our DNA. Joe Kent Katz defined this terror as, quote, the fear of the unpredictable rise and fall of attempted annihilation and expulsion derived from repeated periods of mass anti-Jewish violence in Christian Europe, transmitted as intergenerational trauma, triggered by overt and covert anti-Jewish rhetoric and present-day violence. An easier way to understand it is by Rabbi Tirzah Firestone, who said, quote, for many Jews, catastrophe remains an unconscious organizing principle. She says, quote, Jews have had a proverbial bag packed for hundreds of years, ready for the next expulsion, anticipating the next crisis. What I want you to know is the people who joined me up here, many of us are experiencing that intergenerational trauma and fear right now. You may have heard Charles Schumer's speech a few weeks ago on the floor of the Senate. He said, can you blame us for feeling vulnerable only 80 years after Hitler wiped out half of all Jewish population across the world, while many countries turned their back? Can you appreciate the deep fear we have about what Hamas might do if left to their own devices? Because the long arc of Jewish history teaches us a lesson that it is hard to forget, that ultimately we will be alone. Now, anti-Semitism has always existed in the U.S., but in recent months it has grown exponentially. So have instances of Islamophobia. Hatred of Muslims and Jews have been intertwined ever since the Crusades and the Inquisition, where we were both thrown out of Europe. According to Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, quote, anti-Semitism and false theory of Jewish power are in the DNA of the alt-right white nationalist movement. They go on to explain anti-Semitism this way. Originating in European Christianity, anti-Semitism is a form of ideological oppression that targets Jews. In Europe and the United States, it has functioned to protect the prevailing economic system and the almost exclusively Christian ruling class by diverting blame of hardship to Jews. Like all oppressions, it has deep historical roots, and it uses exploitation, marginalization, discrimination, and violence as its tools. Like all oppression, the ideology contains elements of dehumanization and degradation via lies and stereotypes, as well as mythologies. The myth changes and adapts to different times and places, but fundamentally it says that Jews are to blame for society's problems. The most accessible targets are often Jews rather than the elite political and economic actors who actually have power over the system and who are almost exclusively Christian. So there have been cycles of anti-Semitism throughout both Jewish and Western history. First, it rises and becomes institutionalized. Then there is violence against the Jewish people, then expulsions and killings. And finally, Jews resettle and believe they think they are safe again until the cycle starts again. Remember my grandmother, Pearl. So many of us, many Jews are frightened that we are entering this cycle of anti-Semitism again. Since my childhood, Since those early messages, I have feared being at this time. Israel was founded in 1948 to solve Europe's Jewish problem. The continued cycle of hatred is why so many American Jews support the state of Israel, a Jewish homeland that is self-governed and where all Jews are welcome to immigrate. Please know that supporting the right of Israel to exist is different than supporting the current right-wing government. But there is no way for me to understand calls from non-Jews, primarily from colleagues of mine on the left, to eliminate a Jewish homeland as anything but anti-Semitism. The Anti-Defamation League reports that anti-Semitic incidents, harassment, vandalism, and assault have increased by 388% since October 7th. You probably read that just this week there was a shooting in front of a synagogue in Albany, New York, and an incident at the Syosset School Board that required calling in the police this week. Anti-Semitic rhetoric is used regularly at pro-Palestinian and ceasefire marches, as it was by the neo-Nazis in Charlottesville in 2017. You may have seen the meme from the river to the sea. From the river to the sea is a call for a Palestinian state, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. In other words, it is a call to obliterate Israel. I'm sorry to tell you that several UU ministers, including one staff person from the UUA, have posted that meme on their Facebook pages in the last month. I have been experiencing anti-Semitism from the Unitarian Universalist Association colleagues and movement colleagues these past few months. On Facebook, in petitions, on actions, even in a webinar sponsored by Side with Love. UU-affiliated organizations like Black Lives of UU and DRUM, which is Diverse Religious Professional UU Ministers, organizations that I have supported with both time and money, have failed to condemn Hamas, one even implying that the attack on Israel was an expected result of, quote, settler colonialism. These organizations have used anti-Semitic tropes. Non-Jews have asserted that one can be anti-Israel without being anti-Semitic. But what's been worse for me, is when Jewish UUs have responded that we are being hurt, Jewish anguish and fear has been denied, minimized, and even scoffed at by people we have worked with for justice for decades. These are the same people who taught us that the proper response to a marginalized people saying that they are being hurt is to apologize, to listen, to make amends, to promise to do better. We wonder now why those principles don't apply to us. And we conclude that it's anti-Semitism. So, where can I find hope? Where can we find hope? I think hope is in the movement of people who are coming together despite the horrors of this war. Hope is groups like Standing Together. I don't know if you read about them in the Times, a coalition of Jews and Palestinians who are together organizing to say, not in our name. It's about people loving each other across boundaries. It's those of you who aren't Jewish speaking out and reaching out to those of us who are. To learn more about anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, to speak out when you hear something that denigrates another. It might include, for those of you who aren't Jewish, actually lighting a menorah and putting it in your window to show solidarity with your Jewish neighbors, as Project Menorah suggests. The drawings we gave your children today to color might be placed in your window or on your front door. And if there are people here of Jewish or Palestinian origin who would like to meet up to talk further, please let me know and we will set something up. See, the interesting thing is the Hanukkah story, especially as it is retold in the Talmud, is fundamentally about hope and starting again. So think for a minute about those people who lit that pot of oil knowing it would only last for one day, but hoping that something else would happen. Rabbi Sachs, who Lee quoted, also wrote, "There were times when any other people would have given up after the destruction of the temple or the massacres or the Crusades or the Spanish Inquisition or the pogroms or the Holocaust. But somehow Jews don't sit and weep. They gather what remains, rebuild our people, and lit a candle like no other in history, a light that tells us and the world that there is a power of the human spirit to overcome every tragedy and refuse to accept defeat." I think these candles speak to that hope. Isaac Basheyev Singer wrote about the lit menorah in the Warsaw Ghetto in the 40s. He said, "That glimmer of hope, surrounded by so many shadows, seems to say, without any words, evil has not yet got complete domination. There is a spark of hope still left." So, my friends, my message to you this morning is, let us be part of that hope. Let us find hope within ourselves. Let us work to assure a world that recognizes that no one is free until everyone is free. Let us mourn every single lost life, regardless of its origin. And let us speak out against Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. Let us continue to side with all of humanity. I leave this sermon with the final words of my friends, Rabbi Dennis and Rabbi Sandy Sasso. May the celebration of lights this year usher a new morning and a new year of peace and a future of possibilities and hope. Thank you for listening.